So we're good to go. Guys, I've been seeing you going into conferences, presenting your new book, which is great. So how's it how's the whole experience been doing? I mean, was that being in Italy only or somewhere else? What can you tell me?
With the book in Italian, we did it in Italy, of course,
Okay.
because was in Rome, in Milan, in Trieste. Now we are going to Bologna, then to Camaldoli, then to Gazzada. So there are a lot of events for presenting our book. Of course, I also presented the book, my book in English,
Yeah.
in other occasions. And the Enoch seminar scheduled several events about the within
Yes. Yes.
Judaism
Yes.
perspective. Okay, next week, next week, next week we have a very large conference on the within Judaism perspective that includes the first day also a session on Paul within Judaism, and we have already more than 300 specialists from all over the world that have registered, and we are still 1 week before the conference. So it's going to be a huge event, and we are very, very pleased. We are very pleased, which means that this new perspective of reading the text of the New Testament, not only Paul, but in general, all the documents of the New Testament within Judaism, is drawing the attention internationally and provoking a very, very lively discussion. I mean, Jude and I were in Rome for a conference, for a workshop
presentation.
at the University of Rome La Sapienza, and with the support of the Cardinal Bea Center of the Vatican and the Valdensian School of Theology. It was supposed to last 2 hours. It lasted almost 4 hours.
Wow.
Without a break. And there were a lot of
That's
people.
quite a time.
That's a lot of people. So Paul within Judaism is a superstar.
It is. Professor Gabriele, I need to tell you something. Yesterday, Giulio sent me an email for the link. But for some reason, he sent it in Italian. And I was shocked, like, what's going on? I'm not supposed to read this in Italian. But for some weird reason, if you ask me, I managed to figure out what was the message. And Giulio said, you got it.
I apologize.
And I said I respond to Giulio, maybe that's a sign for me to go and that I should learn Italian. Just saying,
Yeah.
we need to.
It's a good opportunity.
Yeah. Giulio, can you speak Spanish?
So, un poquito.
Poquito. Gabriele, from 1 to 10, how would you rate your Spanish?
My regular Spanish is good if I have time to write and to read the text.
Okay.
No, I spent some summers in Spain when I was a child. So and at the time my Spanish was very good. The problem is practicing. So I have to brush up my Spanish before having a conversation in Spanish. But I like the language.
Yeah, I think we all have some language to brush up a little bit here and there. I mean, my English, I consider that I need to keep improving more and more. That's why I'm doing this in English for some reasons, and there are some other. But yeah, we definitely need to polish that very, very quick. So guys, again, thank you. Everybody, we're live now. So everybody, today, Professor Gabriele Boccaccini is returning to the podcast, the show, but today he's joined by his sidekick, partner in crime, Giulio Mariotti,
Thank you.
So,
and this is guys, the object of our
thank
time.
You. Yeah,
this is the object
so
of our
much.
time.
I love that cover. Yeah.
which is
Look, Julio, he's bragging about it. He's bragging about it as he should.
and yes, we worked together, Giulio and I, to write this volume, which is in Italian,
Yeah.
because it was particularly meant for an Italian audience. It was a great experience working together to write a volume.
Definitely. You know, I wanna give it a shot, Professor Gabriele. Let's see how it works. Okay, I'm gonna read it and tell you. Oh my goodness, this is good. So it goes like this: Paolo di Tarso, un ebreo del suo tempo. How about that? Did I
Correct.
get it right? Or
Pablo di Tarso, un ebreo del suo tempo.
Del suo tempo. Okay, yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you. Okay, so everybody, just to keep you ahead, this interview with Gabriel and Julio is part of the Enoch Seminar in Spanish, en Español initiative. So I'm saving these special interviews because I need to go and edit. I'm gonna have to edit all of this so I can provide that content in the other platforms that we have out there in Spanish. So you know, because I have people written to me, hey, would be great if it would be in Spanish, and I'm like, okay, you need to wait. We're gonna do it. That's why we have the subtitles. You just need to wait a couple of hours for that to be ready. So please have no concern. Now, with that in mind, guys, we're gonna hit the intro and then we're gonna get into things. Okay, so here we go. All right, everybody. Welcome back to your Veriano 1711 podcast. This is your host, Marv. Today, I'm joined by two special gentlemen, of course, Professor Gabriele Boccaccini and Giulio Mariotti from Italy. Guys, how are you doing today?
Fine,
thanks.
I'm happy to be here again.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
So it's an honor to have these two gentlemen here on the show. Remember, this is a podcast where we talk about religion because it's important, but we critically analyze it because that's even more important. Today, we're going to be discussing their most recent book about, you know who, the guy that we love most, Paul, that loving guy. So, Professor Gabriele Boccaccini, if you can show that book on the screen, please, I would appreciate that. And Julio as well.
Okay.
People need to see what's that all about. Thank you so much. So there you have it. This is Pablo de Tarso, un hebreo de su tiempo. I said in Spanish for those people who's waiting the Spanish thing here. So yeah, so I have the first question, but before we go and get into things, just please tell the audience how this book came to be. How was the whole writing process, everything. I'm going to start with Professor Gabriele Boccaccini, and then we're going to pass it on to Giulio.
Yes, very, very quickly. I mean, I published in 2021 the Italian translation of my volume in English, Paul's Three Paths to Salvation, which I published with Hermans in 2020. And the book had a very good reception in Italy, and I was asked to write another volume in which we could expand my point of view and to make Italian audience more familiar with the entire Paul within Judaism perspective. So Giulio is a young, great scholar of Paul in Italy, and
new generation.
Yeah, and we decided to do something that I've never done before: to write a book together, staying one in the United States and the other Giulio in Italy, And so we worked with the file, with a shared file on Google. Fantastic experience. I recommend very much, especially when you are lucky enough to work with such a nice and knowledgeable person like Giulio.
There you have it. There you have it. Well, what better compliment can you expect from a celebrated scholar as a Professor Gabriele Boccaccini? Giulio, tell us about it.
But for me, it's a very pleasure work with Gabriele in this work, in this adventure, and because writing a book of by four hands is a extraordinary experience for me, and because Gabriele is very excellent scholar, and for me it's an honor to work with him. And in this book, we aimed to broadly trace the path of interpretation of Paul and his thought. And we could say that many versions of Paul have existed in the history of the research, and we analyzed these images of Paul.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, guys, how many books have been written about Paul, right? How many books? We continue to how many people writing about this first century Jew? Some would say an anomalous Jew. I'm pretty sure Professor Boccaccini has some other views in there. But again, many things has been written about him. So I'd like to throw the first question here to you both about your book. So we're gonna go and jump into the conversation here. So to you both, in the intro of your book, you sort of lay out a chronology touching on the Christian, Jewish, and apocalyptic Paul, the within Judaism perspective, and the rise of the new perspective. So what can you tell us about these introductory points? Professor Boccaccini, we'll go with you first.
Just one sentence, then I will leave to Giulio to answer more in details. For me, you said before, Paul, there are probably thousands of books written. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's amazing when at a certain point, in certain historical circumstances, a new perspective emerges that allow you to see this author that has been explored by so many other people in a new and fresh perspective. So, so it's not ours. I mean, it's not because we wrote it, but ours is not simply another book on Paul. We think that we have voiced in this book a new approach to Paul. And of course, it's not only our approach, because this book has a structure in which we are trying to voice an entire school of thought, not only our personal findings about Paul. And I repeat, it's very excited when you realize that you are living in a time where a new chapter in the understanding of an author is started. The same happened to me with Enoch. Okay.
Yeah.
And I was very, very lucky to be part of this process. And now I see the same happening with Paul.
Yeah.
Giulio.
Yeah. We have reconstructed the research on Paul in our book and his Jewish identity. It was at the beginning of the 20th century that scholars began to question the supposed opposition between Paul and Judaism, or rather, they began to challenge the prevailing image of first century Judaism, which had often been conflated with a stereotypical view of rabbinic Judaism. Some authors, like Claude Montefiore, was among the first scholars to propose an alternative understanding of Judaism in Paul's time. Following in the footsteps of Solomon Schechter, he asked what form of Judaism Paul was actually opposing and whether it could truly be identified with rabbinic Judaism. In this context, for example, Albert Schweitzer began to view Paul's thought as fitting within the broader framework of what would later be called apocalyptic Judaism. And after the Second World War, the work of William Davis is considered by epicenters as a turning point and an outer understanding example of research into Paul's relationship with Judaism. Davis argued that Paul was essentially a rabbi who differed from rabbinic Judaism only in his belief that the Messiah had already come. Epicenter is undoubtedly the scholar who most influenced the subsequent debate, although many aspects of his landmark work, Paul and Palestinian Judaism, are no longer universally accepted. There is broad agreement that he was instrumental in dismantling the traditional view of Second Temple Judaism as a purely legalistic and particularistic religion. With Sander, the so-called New Perspective on Paul was born. Is the father of New Perspective, Epicenters. While it dismantled the idea of Paul as being opposed to Judaism, it still portrayed him as having moved beyond Judaism into something entirely new. Isn't Judaism, but a new thing where Paul arrived. Subsequently, scholars like James Dunn and N.T. Wright followed in Sanders' footsteps, though they didn't significantly depart from his conclusions. It was until the work of authors like Geiger, Mark Nanos, Paula Fredriksen that a more radical reinterpretation emerged. What is now known as the Paul within Judaism perspective. Meanwhile, scholars such as Louis Martin, Martinus de Boer, and John Berkeley delved deeper into situating Paul within apocalyptic thought, even if they didn't fully embrace the within Judaism approach. It's different, their approach. Although the Paul within Judaism perspective has at times risked flattering post-Judaism by not fully accounting for its originality and diversity. There is now a strong movement toward more precisely defining Paul's Jewish identity, particularly his Messianic Jewish identity, within an apocalyptic worldview, an apocalyptic schema.
Yeah, when you say apocalyptic, I'm all in. I mean, I'm a special. I can say I have a special. I'm a big fan of the apocalyptic school. Actually, Beverly Gabenta, who is one of the foremost, what would you say, authors on this line of thought, I think her most recent book will be come out in November this summer. I think it's a collection of her essays, but it's dealing in part with a bunch of essays are dealing with the apocalyptic thing. So yeah, I mean, also Mark Nanos, he will be returning to the show because we would like to go deeper with. He's been written a lot of books, Romans, Galatians, within Judaism. So the first time that he came, we were just touching the surface. on that. So we want to go deeper. So shout out to Mark Danos if you're paying attention to this. So I mean, there's a lot to say about this guy, Paul.
I also like very much, I also like very much the apocalyptic perspective, because I was able to put together the two loves of my scholarly life, which are Paul and
I know. Yeah. Actually, your mentor, Professor Gabriele, your mentor, the late Paolo Sacchi,
yes,
he wrote the history.
Yes, exactly.
Right. So wow, that's a classic. That's a must reading, definitely.
I think one important point I would like to emphasize that in the past, the apocalyptic thought was considered as a sort of opposite to legalistic Judaism. Okay, and in this sense, it was reproduce this kind of dichotomy, okay, between a good Judaism and a bad Judaism. Okay, what is very refreshing in contemporary studies on Paul is that this dichotomy has been completely rejected. Okay, we are emphasizing the diversity of Second Temple Judaism. There is not only one good trend and one bad trend. There are many different trends. And the relationship also of the apocalyptic tradition with the law is not in complete opposition as it was believed before. And also the portrait of Judaism as a legalistic religion is a myth, is a prejudice, and something that does not correspond to reality.
Actually, my following question, guys, has to do with that, because you as scholars, you better know about this. I like to quote it like this was some sort of caricature of first century Judaism. So let's go with that. With the second question here, goes like this. So the first part deals with the invention of the anti-Jewish Paul. Okay, I want to highlight that word, invention. Paul, as well as replacement theology. I remember I was in a discussion here, laymen discussing about scholarship, right? So not big deal. And someone brought the replacement theology arguments, and almost everybody freaked out. Like, dude, why are you talking? He was advocating replacement theology, and for some reason, he was doing. I will go as far as to say he was doing it in a very innocent, naive way. So that's why we were a little bit candid and kind toward him. But he was advocating replacement theology. And one of the guys approaching very gently saying, you need to read this material, this scholarship, these books, and come back. And we can have a discussion, because that's very dangerous what you're talking and advocating. So be careful. So once again, this is an invention of Paul, the anti-Jewish Paul, as well as replacement theology. So please explain how the church fathers interpretations of Paul's writings led to such a caricature.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. We decided to divide the book into three sections. This choice stemmed from our question: why has Paul's Jewish identity needed to be rediscovered? What led to creation of a distorted anti-Jewish image of him? And to answer these, we retraced the history of the reception in both the patristic period and the modern era. Starting from the 2nd century, we observe the key role played by the so-called Jewish Christians, and the question of how one should position oneself in a world where definitive and widespread parting of the ways between the church and the synagogue had not yet occurred. During the age of the heresiologists and apologists, efforts were made to reclaim Paul and his writings within the bounds of orthodoxy, often at the expense of the so-called Judaizing groups. This frequently resulted in presenting Paul with an anti-Jewish face, an anti-Jewish image. As John Gage writes, the end result of this process is what has been called a domesticated apostle, an invention of domesticated apostle. It's in the 2nd century, beginning with the letter of Barnabas, and especially in the writings of Justin Martyr, that Paul's interpretation begins to shift radically. These authors formulated for the first time the theory of replacement, later taken up by Tertullian and eventually becoming a shared part of Christian tradition. Between Justin and Tertullian, for example, Melito of Sardis was the first to formulate the accusation of deicide, a charge that would become one of the pillars of Christian anti-Judaism's so-called teaching of contempt. Although this idea was fundamental in shaping the anti-Jewish image of Paul, will not dwell on Melito's thought today, simply because the accusation of deicide though once crucial in fueling hatred against the Jews, has now largely been set aside. What, however, still seems to persist in certain conservative or confessional circles is supersessionism. Up until this point, Paul's writings played only a marginal role in Christian preaching, primarily because they were used by Gnostics and Marcionites. Only beginning with Ireneo of Lyons did the Pauline corpus assume a central role in Christian thought and preaching. Before this period, Paul's writings were viewed with suspicion, as their interpretation could open the door to heretical views or those associated with the so-called Jewish Christians. Justin Martyr, one of the earliest Christian apologists who had converted to Christianity from paganism, addresses the relationship between Judaism and Christianity in his dialogue with Trypho. Turning to Tertullian, in his polemic against Marcion, Adversus Marcione, he claims that Paul's criticisms are directed against the Jews, not their God. For Tertullian, then, Paul becomes the first spokesperson for the radical novelty of Christianity and the total erasure of Israel. According to more recent studies, the anti-Jewish polemics were not always rooted in actual encounters with the Jewish communities, but often emerged from internal Christian debates over identity and theology. Nevertheless, even as theological constructs, these debates have had and continue to have profound implications for the historical relationship between Christians and Jews. Tertullian even referred to Paul as the destructor Judaismi, and the patristic era would conclude with the development of two main approaches to Jews within the non-Christian Roman Empire, now Christian Roman Empire, that of John Chrysostom and that of Augustine. The former was marked by a highly intolerant stance, accusing the Jews of deicide and viewing Judaism as a mere relic of biblical religion. The latter, in contrast, saw the Jews' continued presence as meaningful in a eschatological sense, as a people who in the eschatological time would convert and be welcomed into the city of God.
Yeah. Gabriele, what you got to say about that? I mean, I have other questions regarding the church fathers.
Just a short addition to what Giulio said.
Okay.
The invention of the anti-Jewish Paul simply happened when his inner Jewish polemics, his inner Jewish controversy, was read as a controversy from the outside. So if you want, is as simple as that. Okay. So what the church fathers did was not to change Paul or to change the words of Paul, but to change the context of Paul. So to change, Paul was a Second Temple Jew that belonged to a group within Judaism that was in the conversation and also in a controversy with other Jews. But you know, if you move this inner Jewish controversy, taking Paul as somebody that is speaking outside of Judaism, against Judaism, the meaning of the text of Paul changes dramatically.
Okay, but I have to ask you about the church fathers, because I mean, integrating this answer that you just gave us, invention to me, I mean, to my mind, it says many things. For example, Poe's interpretation about Paul and his writing is just not doing good. I mean, they are bringing ideas, or maybe perhaps you can tell me about this. They are articulating Paul not in a very accurate way. Am I right to say that? Because they are constructing this caricature about Paul. I'm not saying Paul was not controversial. I was Julio. The first time that Gabriele came to the show, I was telling him about this question that I asked Mark Nanos. I asked Mark Nanos, do you think Paul was a controversial guy? And Nanos goes like, oh yeah. No doubt about it. So I'm not saying Paul was not a controversial interpreter, Jew, whatever. But what I am saying is that these people, and I'm not demonizing them. Please don't get that from me. I'm not trying to say that, but they are creating something that was not Paul. Am I right to say that? What would you say to that, Gabriele?
Yes. I repeat, they changed the context of Paul. Okay, they changed what was an inner Jewish controversy in. Then the reasons are the ones that Giulio was saying. I mean, supersessionism, the theology of replacement, developed independently from Paul. Okay. Developed independently from Paul as a way of clarify the self-identity of the church, of the Orthodox Church, in relation to Judaism, so as a consequence of the parting of the ways. At this point, Paul was reinterpreted because this was the only way in which Paul could be saved, if you want. Okay, not as a supporter of Marcionism, of a complete separation. Because I mean, the church in the second century faced a deep crisis in the moment in which became an independent or started to become an independent religion from Judaism. It could have cut off completely any relationship with Judaism. And it happened in Marcionism and then in Gnosticism, where the God of the so-called Old Testament is an evil God, is not the God of the church. Judaism is completely a devilish religion,
wow,
etc. Or Christianity could have remained a movement within Judaism, but this did not happen. I mean, Christianity moved outside of Judaism and was in controversy with the other important development of Judaism at the time, Rabbinic Judaism. So the theology of replacement, of course, we are now criticizing this theology very much. And it was the result of compromise.
Yeah.
They wanted to include Judaism, but also at the same time to stress their separate and independent identity. The result was this view that the new religion had replaced the old religion. While the rabbis, on the other hand, said, okay, you claim to have replaced the old religion, okay, we are the one that have remained loyal to the old religion, so you are the traitors. So one of the reasons why also the theology of supersession was so powerful, okay, because to a certain extent, it settled the relation between Christianity and rabbinic Judaism, because at the end, it was accepted by both. Okay? Because for the Christians, it was a way to say, okay, we are the new ones. We have accepted the new revelation and we have replaced the old one. And you, rabbinic Jews, you are blind people that have not seen the truth. And on the other hand, the rabbis could say, yes, you are the one that has who has gone astray, that have completely departed from the old path. And we are the one that are proud of being, of having remained loyal to the old religion. So this paradigm of old and new, ironically, played well in both traditions. Of course, we are historians now, and you have to say, okay, not necessarily a theological construct correspond to what happened. We know that Christianity is not completely new, because Christianity preserved a lot of old Jewish traditions that were lost in rabbinic Judaism. And we know at the same time that rabbinic Judaism is not as old, okay? Rabbinic Judaism was a reform movement that introduced many new ideas in Judaism. So this idea of Christianity being progressive and the rabbis being conservative does not correspond to reality from the historical point of view, because in reality we are facing two reform movements, Christianity and rabbinic Judaism, that innovated the tradition of Israel while keeping each some elements that were lost in the other movement.
Now, you know, that's something I have never, it's never been clear to me. Rabbinic Judaism is post 70, the fall of Jerusalem and everything, right? In the chronology. Gabriele, am I right to say that? Like, it's something post the events during 70.
Yes,
Giulio?
the rise of rabbinic Judaism,
the
rise of rabbinic Judaism parallels the rise of Christianity.
So, okay.
From Second Temple Judaism, two religions were born.
Oh, okay. And when you say reform, that to me tells a bit of okay, we're going to standardize the text we're going to be using. We're going to be making sure that we're not mingled with those little creepy Christians, to say in some way, right? So just very quick, how long does that reform take to be completely good to go? Like, they were already set as rabbinic Judaism.
Giulio, do you want to answer? Okay, and it took centuries. Okay, it's not overnight. Wow. Okay, so it's not that one morning the Christians and rabbis woke up and said, okay, we are now two different religions. Okay, it was a gradual, long process that also happened in different ways in different geographical settings. So we have to consider the complexity of the problem, okay? What is important is to understand that we say, of course, Christianity was born from Judaism. Yes, Christianity was born from the ancient religion of Israel, but was not born from the kind of Judaism that was formed, that was shaped by the rabbis. So it's not that when I don't know. I have some friends that are attending a Jewish seder and are so happy because they say, "Oh, that's wonderful! I am experiencing what Jesus was experiencing." No, because the seder, the Jewish seder, is a rabbinic ritual. So it's not the form that existed in the first century. It's the form that was developed by the rabbis. So I prefer the image of Christianity and Judaism of today as two brothers or sisters, as two siblings who were born from the same womb. I mean, from the same very diverse, very complex experience of the plurality of Second Temple Judaism is plural.
Okay. And is it correct to state that Christianity adopted, or what would be the word here? Christianity took the apocalyptic heritage into, am I right to say that to you both?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I understand, but Professor Gabrielli, he wrote an entire book on this. I mean, for those interested, he wrote an entire book about this very subject. Just so you know, I want to put it there on the screen. It's been a while, yeah. I think it was 2001, according here to the info I have on Amazon.
Yes.
And it's called Roots of Rabbinic Judaism. And basically, the abstract says that Gabrielli argues here that Rabbinic Judaism was actually a daring reform movement. There you have it, people. So, published by Ehrmans. You can go and get it. Don't miss a chance. So, let's go with the third questions, guys, if you will. Let's move on here. I like this very, very, because it has to do with the Lutheran people. Okay, so you talk about the rise and fall of the Lutheran pole. Oh, what is that? The condemnation of Jewish legalism and even racial anti-Semitism. And why is it a firm ground to conclude that Paul was not Lutheran? Please tell us about that. Julio.
What is often been presented as the Lutheran Paul was in reality an image created to challenge to the Catholic Church, accusing it of legalism, much like the Jews and of undetermined the grace of God. Just like in the patristic era, Paul was being used in a battle that wasn't really his. His critique of salvation by works, as professed by Catholics, was reinterpreted as a direct attack on Judaism, using Paul's own words to accuse Jews of legalism. Today, this Lutheran image of Paul is being increasingly questioned, criticized, and even openly rejected, often from within Protestant circles themselves. Many now see it as a symbol of anti-Jewish and intolerant interpretation, one that's anachronistic and unfairly distant from the actual historical context of the first century. It's become a barrier to recovering who Paul really was and what his theology actually meant. In the end, Paul was simply Paul, a Jew of his time who followed Jesus. He shouldn't be confused with the interpretation of his later readers, even the most influential ones like Augustine or Luther. And regarding the spread of anti-Semitism, all churches acknowledged their own responsibility after the Shoah, starting with the steps taken by the Reformation churches after World War II, and later by the Catholic Church during the Second Vatican Council, especially in Nostre Aetate, chapter 4, which specifically addresses the church's relationship with Jewish people and Christian people.
And Shoah, Julio, if I understand you correctly, means Holocaust. Am I right?
Yeah.
I'm not a Jewish person, but I know that.
Yeah.
Which I personally consider to be probably the darkest. That's the what would you call that? Is probably the darkest event in the past century, right? So what I understand is that, I mean, in the case of Augustine, Luther, people coming after them, like I mean, I don't, you can correct me on this, but I don't recall Luther saying, "Well, I want to create a movement with my name on it, follow my." No, he was not interested in that at all. But people coming after them, they inherited this view, and then we have the Lutheran Paul, and it's almost unavoidable to me as a layman not to recall Christer Stendhal's famous article, the introspective, so impactful even today. So again, Gabriele, this is another example how interpretation plays a critical part when it comes to interpreted people from ancient times. In this case, Paul.
Exactly. I mean, we don't want to be misunderstood. I mean, Augustine and Luther were great interpreters of Paul. I mean, not.
Yeah.
But
thanks.
There are some elements in the interpretation of Augustine and Luther that unfortunately have had strong implications in the development of Christian anti-Judaism. Okay. In the case of Luther, in particular, because of the, as Giulio said, of the opposition between grace and work, faith and work. So Christianity was described as a religion of grace, while instead Judaism was described as a legalistic religion, so a religion based on works. We know that this is not correct, and we know, like Giulio said, that this was more a consequence of an inner Christian controversy that separated Luther from the Roman Catholic Church. So unfortunately, the Jews pay the expenses, okay, of this controversy. Then, of course, so from the anti-Jewish Paul, we had the Lutheran Paul with this opposition between grace and faith. And then we have the anti-Semitic Paul, I mean, which is not exactly the same, but of course, the anti-Jewish elements in the churches influenced also the rise of secular anti-Semitism, to a large extent prevented the church from responding quickly to the challenge of anti-Semitism. I know it's famous that Hitler, when the Protestant churches questioned some of the politics of anti-Semitic politics, he republished the works of Martin Luther, some of the works of Martin Luther, of course, not all, in this way signifying that he was the one that actually was put into practice the teachings of Luther, while the confessional church was to a certain extent betraying Luther and betraying the principle of the Lutheran Church. Hitler, Nazi Germany also promoted the foundation of the Institute for the eradication, which is very interesting, an institute for the eradication of Jewish elements from Christian teaching. Okay, this was exactly the title of this institute. It witnessed that worked exactly in the same years of the Holocaust, and was led by respected Christian theologians. But after the war, after the Second World War, fortunately, first within the Protestant churches, and you mentioned Christa Stendhal, I was lucky enough to meet him.
You met him?
Yes,
Oh, good. I envy you.
He was really nice, a nice, very nice person.
He was Swedish, right?
Swedish, yes.
Swedish,
He also taught many years in the United States. He was also professor in the United States
Harvard,
for many years. So I was fortunate enough to know him, to meet him, and it was really okay. He was Bishop of Stockholm.
Uppsala,
of the Christian Jewish dialogue, and is very, very important, this process of self-criticism that first started within the Protestant churches and the Lutheran Church in consequence of the Holocaust, and then also was developed in the Catholic Church in the Vatican II Council. We are part, I'm old enough to have seen a lot of this process. Believe me. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when in Italy some very anti-Jewish sermons were delivered before the Vatican II, and to have lived the excitement of the change, of the dramatic change in the attitude of the church in all these years. We see what John the 23rd did when he was the first pope to welcome a delegation of Jewish organization, and he repeated the word. I mean, the name of John 23rd was Giuseppe Roncalli, Joseph. Okay, and he introduced himself to this audience with Jewish leaders, repeating the words of the Bible. I am Joseph, your brother. from Genesis. And I remember also when John Paul II for the first time visited the synagogue of Rome in 1986 was a very important event. So we have seen a lot of things happening in these past decades. And the rediscovery of the Jewish Paul has been facilitated also by this new climate in the relationship between Jews and Christians. And at the same time, scholarly work has facilitated.
That's where I'm going. That's where I'm going.
Christian dialogue. It's not simply that we say these things because we believe in the Christian-Jewish dialogue. I mean, even the opposite. I mean, scholars have become to say some of these things, even before the Jewish, the Christian-Jewish dialogue was popular, okay?
Yeah.
And because of this, they have pushed to a certain extent the churches to follow a new path, exactly because of the new discoveries, the new understanding of Second Temple Judaism. It would be enough to mention the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, but really after the war, at the same time in which scholars were redefining the relationship with Judaism, was making them aware of the great diversity of Jewish groups and movement in the first century, something that we had no idea.
And thank you for pitching that, Gabriele, because you can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but it has come to my attention, and this is not new. I mean, within academic circles, this is not new, but it has come to my attention that even within scholarship, we have had to deal with this monster called anti-Semitism. It is my understanding that Gerhard Kittel, I'm not sure, and I'm not gonna put my skin on the fry here, but I'm not sure if he was a Nazi per se, or he had some affinity with the Nazi party. You can correct me. You can tell me whether that is true or not. But even in the Hermeneia series, this series of historical critical commentaries with high credibility and everything, even there we have had people who had affinity with the Nazis. So anti-Semitism is a monster that needs to be tackled head on. And I think Lawrence Schiffman recently wrote, I think it's 2 or 3 volumes, I'm not sure, but they were published by the Grutter about the anti-Semitism thing. I think it's one of the latest scholarly material that has been published about this subject. So anti-Semitism is not new. Can we agree on that? Now, my personal question to you both is this: do we have evidence of anti-Semitism even in the first century, or it's a modern thing that has come to our attention? What can you say about that, Gabriele or Giulio? Yeah. Whichever. Yeah.
I mean, prejudices against other people have always existed.
Yeah.
Giulio, you read, I mean, we have a lot of also of anti-Italian prejudice, okay, and I guess that there are also a lot of prejudice against Latinos so there are prejudice everywhere. I mean, is not the point. The point is when these prejudices are becoming part of the militant theological discourse against others, or they are becoming part of a militant political discourse against others. I mean, anti-Semitism, prejudice, unfortunately, are always with us. And I don't think that we'll never be able completely to eradicate.
No.
Okay? But the problem
is regrettable.
In some circumstances, anti-Judaism becomes, and maybe Giulio, you can give also some examples according to your research, like in modern period. In some circumstances, already in the 2nd century, if you like, and later in the Middle Ages, and then even in modern period, first of all, anti-Judaism became an important theological element for self-identity, essentially. And in starting at the end of the 19th century, and then the first half of the 20th century, secular anti-Judaism or anti-Semitism became an important element in the political discourse. It's very, very scary when prejudice
Tell me about it.
part of, and unfortunately we see examples even today. I don't want to enter on this. I will leave people to decide for themselves. But it's very scary when prejudice are used in order to support political agendas and a political discourse. This is very, very scary because we are no longer dealing with innocent.
No.
Never innocent, but we are never dealing with this kind of things. But we are, and maybe asking that question, Giulio could give you some more.
Giulio.
Yeah, I think so. While in antiquity, anti-Judaism was perhaps more theoretical than practical because the church father often don't live with Jews. With historical contingencies, it becomes practical. For example, the Christianization of the Roman Empire and in modernity, it became the foundation for anti-Semitism or roots in some kind of anti-Semitism. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna end with this question, so we can move on to the fourth question here. Is it true that the epistle to Barnabas, I think it is that anti-Semitic, Giulio, Gabriele? Is it true that this epistle is heavily with anti-Semitic?
Yeah.
Oh. Okay.
Or at least there are strong elements. I mean, we may discuss the difference between anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism. I mean, usually we prefer that to use the term anti-Semitism to deal with secular anti-Judaism. Okay, but you will agree
that
sometimes the boundary between the two is very, very difficult.
The lines are blurred. Yeah, definitely. I agree with that.
To define.
Yeah. Okay, guys, let's move on to the fourth question because we want to value your time. So as we read on, one runs into the heading extra. Okay, my Latin is not that good. Extra ecclesiam nulla salus, the exclusivist interpretation of Paul. So how does this section fit with the rest of the book?
Yeah, briefly, alongside the rise and the spread of supersessionist theology and the contrast often drawn between the Christian inclusivism and Jewish exclusivism, we wanted to highlight a key paradox. If Paul truly were the champion of Christian universalism, then he couldn't also have been an exclusivist when it came to salvation. And yet, over the centuries, this assumption has been taken as absolute, sometimes even backed by selective use of Paul's own words. What's more, this exclusivist approach seems to have been directed with particular intensity toward the Jewish people and no toward the Gentiles, for example, across all generations, seen as those who had known Christ but failed to accept this message. But the truth is, an exclusivist understanding of salvation didn't emerge in Christian theology until centuries after Paul's time. We don't find in Paul exclusivist thought. And when it was eventually formulated, part of it was retroactively projected onto Paul, thanks to a reading shaped by supersessionist and anti-Jewish bias. To portray Paul as a defender of exclusivist doctrines, especially toward the Jewish people, to whom he remained deeply connected, and among whom he never saw himself as an apostate, is quite simply a distortion of his thought, of his word and his letter.
Okay, I need to ask you, what does extra ecclesiam nulla salus mean? I hope I'm not pronouncing a spelling there.
Yeah, outside the church, there isn't salvation.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah.
So I was uttering such a thing, which I don't agree with.
No,
Gabriele, what can you tell us about that?
No, I mean, est ecclesiam nulla salus as became, I mean, at a certain point, several centuries after Paul. I mean, Giulio is perfectly right. There is no, Paul never said so. Okay, it's not something that you read in the letters of Paul. Exactly as you don't read the idea that if you do not if you do not have faith in Jesus, you are not saved. These are not words of Paul. I mean, sometimes people think that he said so, but he never did it. Okay, Paul said that if you believe in Jesus, you have a chance of being forgiven and to reach salvation, which is a different thing. So sometimes we have a pseudo Paul, pseudo Paul, I would call it. I mean, something that we think that Paul said, and then we discover that he never did. So this is very important. It must said, however, that this principle in the history of the church, there is no salvation outside the church. First of all, was born for those Christians who abandoned the church. Okay, was not born to define those who were outside the church. First of all, this saying was used to call back, okay, if you want, the people that had abandoned the church. Then, of course, was applied also for people that never had joined the church. But he must also said honestly that yes, sometimes we had very strict interpretations of a saying. Sometimes we have a more elastic or fluid interpretation, including by some very important Christian theologians like St. Thomas of Aquinas. I mean, who never excluded the possibility of salvation outside the regular or the normative means of the church. Okay, they applied this saying to people that consciously had rejected the message of Christ, knowing the message and knowing the truth of the message. Okay, okay, but not about people that in good faith were not convinced that the message of the church was the truth. It is must said, however, that more often this more broader meaning of the saint was applied rather to to pagans, to people that were, I don't know, in the missions. Okay. Even, I must say, developed very much when the Catholic Church spread in South America. Because they were recognizing a sort of natural goodness of humans that try to follow the principles of their own conscience, what Paul would call the natural law. Okay. He must also say that sometimes Christianity had more problems applying this more broader vision, broader understanding of the saint to the Jewish people, because there was the prejudice that the Jews are those people that know the truth because they have the Old Testament. And so if they are rejecting Christ, it's not because they are not convinced of the Christian message, but because they want to be against. They have decided to be against. Of course, this is a prejudice, but you see,
it is indeed. Yeah.
Very often, as the prejudice that Jews cannot be in good faith, because they read the Old Testament and everything is written there so clearly. It's not so clear. Okay. So this kind of prejudice, unfortunately, has lasted long, and only in recent times there is a different attitude toward salvation of the Jews. Of course, Christians are claiming that salvation is only for grace and come from Christ, but not necessarily through the explicit obedience or acceptance of Christ as a Messiah and baptism and so on. Okay, so but this is still a very important issue in Christian theology, and we are developing the discussion of it, especially in the last part of the book.
And we're talking about the guy who wrote a book on the 3 paths of salvation, on Paul. So there you have it, definitely. Julio, something you might add to this question? Something further that you have about this?
Giulio.
Okay. Sorry. But in the letters of Paul, we don't read that the salvation is only of the disciple of Jesus, and Paul said, who proclaim the name of Jesus, they will be saved, but not only who proclaim the name of Jesus really save. The same Paul said that we cannot judge the people who are outside our communities, and only God know if these people can be saved.
No, I agree, and you know that is something because the last time Gabriele came to the show, I was telling him, perhaps Gabriele doesn't remember, or you can tell me, that there are 2 topics in biblical scholarship that are close to my heart, namely Christological things and soteriological stuff. I'm very into that. So with that you're saying, it's something that I've been holding like forever. Like there are people, there are communities where their generations are going by after another, and the gospel, and I'm not saying not only in this nowadays during this time and era, but in the past as well, that they had no idea, no clue about this proclamation as Jesus King and everything. And how are we supposed to put the judgment thing on them without having received that message? So I agree with that, and it's something that it requires more discussion. Trust me, I'm with you on that. But I find very, and I don't know what Gabriele can add to this, but I find it very disturbing to some extent to, being like, what would be the word here? Because I don't want to misrepresent people doing what they do in ecclesiastical settings. But for me, it's not enough just to say, if they are not receiving the gospel, they are not part of the community and they will not be saved. Well, Paul differs a little bit from your perspective. I'm speaking in general terms. As you said, Julio, they have the natural law, as Gabriele was saying as well. Okay? And this get us into mortal things and everything. So that's something that I've been struggling. That's the word. I've been wrestling with this kind of views. Gabriele, something that you want to add to this question so we can move on to the following.
Yes. Just quickly.
I know you have a lot to add.
No. We have to consider that Paul is dealing with with many different elements. Of course, salvation is always a gift from God. This is something that Paul repeats, and all Jews at this time repeat it. Salvation is a gift of God. But the gift of God are multiple. It's not that God has given only one gift. Okay. First of all, there is the gift of a natural law, which is the unwritten law that is given to all human beings. This is a very important, has remained a very important concept in Christian theology as well. And I was mentioned before that, for instance, the Catholic missionary revived these words of Paul when they spread Christianity in places like the Americas, etc., because they recognized that there are seeds of salvation, even outside the church. Outside the sacraments of the church, outside. Okay. So first of all, we have a gift of a natural law, which is a gift that is for all people, all, because it's a gift given to on the day of creation. All human beings have received this gift of understanding in unwritten words what is good and what is evil. Then we have the law of Moses, that is a written gift, because it is written there exactly in what is good and what is evil. But Paul will say the law promises salvation, promises for those who obey, for those who are obedient, but promises also damnation and punishment for those who disobey. And now we have this, for Paul, we have this third gift, that is the coming and the death of a Messiah, as the final gift given by God to humans, a gift that not only includes the natural law and the Mosaic Torah, but a gift that is able to provide forgiveness of sins for the sinners, and so is capable of adding more to expand, to broaden the boundaries of salvation into a much broader perspective in which not only those who are accepting the gift and are living according to the laws of God are saved, but there is a hope of salvation also for the sinners, because for Paul this is the most important outcome of the death of Jesus, the possibility that the boundaries of salvation are now make larger, broaden. I mean, sometimes we have interpreted Paul as somebody who have restricted the boundaries of salvation only to people who are baptized, while instead Paul, the goal of Paul was to make the boundaries of salvation broader, so to include not only the righteous but also the sinners. Maybe Giulio, you could answer something, add something referring to the third part of our volume.
Yes. In particular, I can tell about the discovery of Paul of Christ, like a solution of the problem of evil. Sorry. And in particular, Paul's Christology is one of the many expressions of the messianism found within Second Temple Judaism. It isn't yet the Johannine Christology, nor the later developments where Christ increasingly emerges with the figure of the Father. Especially Paul's Christ then is divine, but not God. Paul never referred to Jesus as God, like the Greek term theos is. For Paul, Christ is pre-existent but non-created, and the idea of Christ as created, co-eternal with the Father, will only begin to take shape at the end of the first century and into the second, alongside parallel developments like the notion of the Torah as uncreated, and even our close reading of the Philippians, supported by numerous studies, suggest this. When Paul says that Christ was in the form of God, it doesn't mean that Christ was God, and being like God in Paul's language doesn't equate to being God himself. In fact, Paul never referred to Jesus with the title Theos, for example. And like I said, the problem of Paul is the evil, in particular, more than explicate who is the Christ, or the Christ like God. And the problem is the evil and the domination of the evil in the history of the humanity. And one of the most distinctive aspects of Paul's Jewish worldview is the concept of evil. It's here that is Messianism finds its context. The revelation on the road to Damascus reveals not just a calling, but a solution to the overwhelming presence of evil in the world. In Galatians, just before recounting his calling, Paul refers to this present evil age. This is typical apocalyptic talk. History is seen as split into two periods. The current one ruled by evil, and the future one brought in by the Messiah. For Paul, Christ's first coming marked the start of evil's downfall. Scholars have debated whether Paul's view of evil is cosmological, evil as a force external to humanity, or anthropological, rooted in human behavior. But views exist within apocalyptic literature. For example, E.P. Sanders argued for a solution to plight model. God sent the Messiah because humanity was unable to overcome the cosmic power of evil on its own. This leads to the question, how did Paul understand the origin of evil? Did he align with the book of the Watchers, which attributes evil to fallen angels, or did he interpret the Adam story to place the burden of sin on humanity? Our research follows how this understanding developed over time. Paul picks up the idea of fallen angels, but in the end, he puts the spotlight on Adam, and then turns the whole story around. Just as sin came into the world through Adam, salvation comes through Christ, the new Adam, the second Adam, in a typological model. Like the fallen angels in Jewish apocalyptic writings, Adam's fall sets off a kind of cosmic chaos that only a divine, superhuman Messiah can fix. For Paul, evil precedes individual sins. It's a dominating force already at work in the world, a force Christ has defeated, thought its effect persists in this in between time, the era between the two parousia, the two coming of Christ, where the prince of this world still acts. And in this period, in this era, Paul found the solution to the evil problem.
Yeah, yes, I think that this is certainly one of the most important elements, if I may add, that we have strengthened in our book, that we have dealt with in our book. Because usually Paul is interpreted as somebody who criticizes the law, so as the enemy of the Torah. We think that at the center of his thought was a sort of consciousness of the inability of the law to save people. But this is not the point of Paul. This is not the point of Paul when we read Paul within an apocalyptic context, because in reality, for Paul, like for many apocalyptic Jews of the first century, at the center of the central problem, and you said, Giulio, that Christ is the solution of this problem. At the center of it's the remedy. At the center of this problem is exactly the strength of evil, which makes people unable to follow the Torah. So this explains a sort of contradiction that we see in the letters of Paul. On the one hand, Paul complains that the Torah is not enough, is not sufficient in order to be saved. On the other hand, he repeats that the law is holy and good, and that the promises, the covenants of God cannot be revoked. So if we don't understand the apocalyptic foundation of Paul's thought, we are not able to understand the foundations of his thought. And what remains are statements that appears to us as contradictions, while instead are perfectly coherent with the apocalyptic approach of Paul. Paul thinks that all human beings, Jews and Gentiles, are under the power of evil. And as it's proved by the fact that sin, transgression, is common to both Jews and Gentiles. So, which means that evil, which in an apocalyptic way he understands as a sort of evil inclination, inclination that is forcing or seducing humans to commit evil, to commit transgressions. These elements are already present in before the transgression of each human being, and this is part of a discussion that is already going on within Judaism at the time of Paul. What is new in Paul, of course, is, from his point of view, after giving the natural law and the Torah of Moses, now God is recognizing the fragility of human beings, their difficulty to be evil, to be good, so to obey the commands of God. And God is even eager to sacrifice his own son to defeat evil and to give even sinners the possibility of redemption. And even more, the Son of God, Jesus, unlike the other son, Adam, is obedient and has accepted this, accept to lower himself, to give himself, to give up himself, to offer his own life for salvations of all human beings. I think, however, Giulio, there is also another interesting element in our book. I think this element of being at the end of times, being this understanding of Paul, that the end was literally imminent, is also the key term, not only to understand the messianism of Paul as the ultimate remedy to the power of evil given to people at the end of history, but is also the key for understanding the mission of Paul toward the Gentiles. Paul is celebrated as the apostle of Gentiles, and although he was not the first one in Christianity to preach to the Gentiles, he was not the first Jew to preach to the Gentiles, there is a very strong emphasis, and once again, this is a consequence of his apocalyptic worldview. Can you add, I mean, what you think, Giulio?
But I think for Paul, the law, the Torah, Paul never said that the Torah is abrogated, and also Paul was seen for many centuries like the Christian who rejected the law. But as I said before, the problem of Paul is evil, and the Christ coming is the solution. But this coming open a new era, a new time, a eschatological time, and in this time change also the relationship between Jews and Gentiles, because the time between two parousie, to Christ comings, is the time for realize the eschatological Israel, the all Israel who been saved of Romans 11:26, and as we show in the book, Paul operated within a pluralist Jewish debate about the role of Gentiles, the law, and the future of Israel. And he moved into these arguments in a particular time, in the eschatological time. And at the same time, Paul lived in Second Temple Judaism period, where when Jews held diverse views on Gentiles, on whether they could be included in the covenant community and how. For example, the covenant community separated not just from Gentiles, but from other Jews, believing the temple was corrupted and Jerusalem is corrupted. Paul steps into this conversation with a bold eschatological claim. The end times had already begun with Christ's fifth coming. This meant that Israel's promised restoration was underway, and that both Jews and Gentiles were part of it. For Paul, Gentiles didn't become Jews, nor did the Jews stop being Jews. Instead, I said before, both together constituted the renewed Israel he speaks of in Romans 11. It was the revelation of the risen Christ that drove Paul's mission. His calling to the Gentiles wasn't a normative Jewish practice, a proselytist practice, but in the context of the eschaton, it became urgent.
Okay, we have lost Julio as well. So, but I think we are at the end of our conversation, because we have covered more or less all the parts of the book. That I repeat, the book Paolo and Pablo de Tarso, un ebreo del suo tempo, Paul of Tarsus, a Jew of his own time, or within Judaism, a reading of Paul, presented introduction about the history of research on the Jewishness of Paul, a first part about the invention of the Jewish Paul, in which we are dealing with the way in which Paul has been interpreted or misinterpreted in the history of the church in relation to Judaism. In the second part, we are dealing with the discovery of the Jewishness of Paul, dealing with the main elements of Paul's thought when he is read within Judaism, within the Judaism, the diversity of Judaism of his own time. And finally, in the third part, we are dealing with the inclusive view of salvation of Paul, that doesn't think that salvation is limited only to those people who believe in Jesus, that have faith in Jesus, but believe that the way to salvation remains open also to those people that are following the natural law or following Mosaic Torah, because Christ, in his view, is the recapitulation of the natural law and the Mosaic Torah, as well as the one that gave his own life to save, to give forgiveness of sins to the sinners. I hope you have enjoyed this conversation in spite of some technical problems. And I want to repeat again your invitation to read this book in Italian, and in particular to think about what it means to read Paul within the diversity of Second Temple Judaism, instead of reading him, as Tertullian did, as the destroyer of Judaism. Paul is at the very beginning of a Christian movement. He wrote before the destruction of the temple, before the parting of the ways between Christianity and Judaism. He never converted to Judaism. He moved from one Jewish group to another. What he experienced of the way to Damascus was a revelation, a call from God, was not a move from one religion to another that did not exist yet, because Christianity at the time of Jesus was one of the Second Temple movements within Judaism, and not a separate religion. This, of course, does not mean that Paul was a Jew as everybody else. One doesn't want to diminish in any way the originality of Paul, but allow us to read the letters of Paul within a different perspective. Thanks. And yes, we are still, yes. See you I hope in some other opportunities. Bye.
There you go. There you go.
Okay, we have
Goodness, I hate power outages. I need to have
Yeah.
my own,
yes.
what do you call it? An energy generator, power generator thing. I already wrote to Julio to return. Let's just wait for him.
Anyhow, we continued the conversation until.
Oh, really? You did?
Yes. So we covered a lot of other aspects. I mean, all the other aspects of the volume. If you are able to recover the recording, you'll have a lot of material from us.
So you addressed the last two questions.
Yes,
am I right?
Yes, we cover more or less all questions that actually I interviewed Giulio and vice versa. So I did both parts. And I hope Giulio will come back. If you want to, I don't know, I mean, are you at the end using all this material to put together a video?
Yeah. The thing. Yeah, basically the thing, Gabriele, is to, just to take this one, for example, I will have to edit out the whole thing and put the two parts together. But it will go with the Enoch seminar label, not with my podcast. No, I will take that out because this is material exclusive for the Enoch seminar. So I can upload it to the Facebook group. And that's what I intend to do. So if you already addressed the question, I think we're okay. I hope you can. Yeah.
If you're editing the conversation, you can add you as asking question or interacting with what we say, but you can make some editing, or if you like to record now some sort of finale of the conversation. Giulio is telling me that he's coming back. He's trying to come back. It was funny.
I would like to.
First, we lost you. And
yeah.
At the end, I lost also Giulio. So.
Oh, really?
Yes, just that. So I had to give an ending.
Okay, here we got Giulio. Yeah.
Okay.
Giulio's back. Thank you, Giulio, for returning. Thank you.
Do you want to? you want
Yeah,
to add something in at the end? I mean, we covered more or less, no, Giulio, more or less we covered
Yes.
in all your questions. But if you want to now we are recording a sort of finale for the conversation. We are here, so
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, the last two questions had to do with basically the three subsequent sections. Paul's non-conversion. When you talk about the recovery of the Jewishness of Paul, that's the fifth question. Also, the three sections. The first one was Paul's non-conversion on the road to Damascus. Number two, evil as a corruptive force that precedes the transgressors, which is something I was very interested to tackle. And last but not least, the restoration of Israel, Paul, the Gentiles, and the law. You covered that too, right? Let me see the
yes,
six.
more or less we covered all these elements. We didn't. Yes, we covered. We also covered the problem of the inclusiveness of salvation for Paul.
Okay. Can I ask you both just something very quick regarding the evil thing?
Okay, we can. Because Giulio, Mavis is in any case editing.
Yeah.
Our
I will be editing this thing out, and I'm gonna put together the two sections.
So
something good that Stringer gives you. Yeah.
Yeah. Even though we are repeating something, it will not matter. I mean, because we are producing some material that is recorded and then it will be edited.
Yeah. And take that very into consideration, because this is material for the Enoch seminar, not for that's the main goal. Okay, so my question is this regarding the evil what do you call it, the evil era, evil world. So Paul part of his worldview is that he's integrating demonic powers, and for him, this demonic power, principality, authorities, they are the main antagonistic line regarding his gospel. How would you describe that overall? So just give me the lay of the land here, Giulio.
For Paul, his cosmological view of the world reckon a more protagonist in this view, and the first protagonist is God, but between God and humanity, there are many powers who influenced the human life, and in particular, as we said before, the fallen angels transgression, or the Adam transgression brought in the world a problem, and this problem is the presence and dominion of the evil, and this is a very problem for Paul, because the man without superhuman help cannot resolve this problem. The only solution for this problem is a superhuman Messiah that can fix this situation. And for Paul, evil precedes individual sins. It's a dominating force already at work in Galatians 1:4. Paul said, we live in a present evil era, evil period, and only the discovered Christ, discovered Messiah in the Damascus road, in the revelation on Damascus road, allowed to Paul to know that there is a solution for this problem, for the problem of evil, and is influential to humanity.
Okay, so you're saying, Julio, that for Paul, unlike many of us modern people, he thought that there were evil forces beyond the curtain, that they were operating against whatever mission he had in this case, and he's taking these beings, whatever you can call it, he's taking them very seriously.
Yes.
Right, Gabriele? I mean, for him, they're real.
Yes, but we have to consider that the presence of spirits was taken seriously by everybody, so was not something. So the problem for ancient people at the time of Paul was more to understand who these spirits were and what was their role. Okay, so of course we cannot expect Paul to have our understanding, okay, of cosmology, or our understanding the existence of spirits were taken for granted by everybody. So the problem was that in apocalyptic circles, the presence of evil was explained exactly as a rebellion by evil spirits. Okay, essentially. So there is a sort of I mean, the question of the origin of evil is a central question in any form of monotheism, and in the apocalyptic tradition, their problem was that for them God could not be or should not be the source of evil. If God did not make evil, it means that somebody else is to blame. And so they, in their, if you want, mythical language, or mythical worldview, they explained the presence of evil as a consequence of a rebellion of angels. So there is a sort of cosmological myth, cosmological view of the origin of evil, which makes God innocent. So it was a rebellion against God, a rebellion against the order of God that produced evil.
On it. Sorry, I couldn't find that speaker.
And Paul is reflecting exactly this kind.
It doesn't look like you have an app named Visco.
Sorry.
That guy again.
And Paul is reflecting exactly this kind of understanding, this kind of apocalyptic understanding. And of course, because evil comes from a supernatural, origin, evil can have only a superhuman remedy. And this remedy for Paul is the coming of the Messiah. Coming of the Messiah who gave his life is the antidote. I mean, the coming of Jesus is what counterbalance the sin of the angels. So this is an important premise, because if you are not taking this premise, you don't understand the entire Pauline building. Okay, this is the foundation of the Pauline theology. The idea that there is a evil that comes from evil forces, evil through the sin of Adam. But now, at the end of times, exactly as evil has spread as a sort of disease, now God has sent his own son, he sacrificed his own son, and so grace is spreading, and the spread of grace is counterbalancing the spread of evil. So there is a perfect correlation in Paul between the sin of Adam and the sacrifice of Christ, because one is the remedy of the other.
Like the way you put it. I had Tyler Stewart on the show, and he came to, I know you know him. Julio, do you know Tyler Stewart? Okay, great. So he came and talked about his book on the evil, the persistence of evil, and the book of Galatians, which is something that Gabriele posted a couple of months ago in the Enoch seminar in the Facebook group. But basically, Stewart argued that for Paul in Galatians, he proposes an Enochic ideology. Like for Paul, what happened in Mount Hermon, the Watchers and everything, Enoch, that's something that is part of the Paul discourse when it comes to the evil age, the present evil age. So I find, me personally, I can see some resonance with what Gabriele is telling us now. So I want to touch on this very quick, because this is very important for me. I'm pretty sure for the people else that will be listening to this interview. In part 3, Christ is presented as the ultimate remedy for the problem of evil, as Gabriele was saying a couple of seconds ago. You also write about Christ's divinity and messianism in Paul, as well as the paths of salvation in Christ. So please expand on that, you both. I like this one.
Essentially, Paul's Christology is one of the many expressions of messianism. We remember the Neusner books, Neusner book Judaism and their messiahs, and hence there are many expressions of messianism and messiahs, and in Second Temple Judaism. It isn't yet the Johannine Christology, nor the later developments where Christ increasingly merges with the figure of the Father. The Paul's Christology is low Christology, not high Christology. What we have highlighted is this at the time of Paul, especially among those shaped by an apocalyptic worldview. Judaism included the belief in a range of intermediary beings, superhuman figures who existed between God and humanity. This feature is typical of apocalyptic thought, and Paul's theology fits right into that word. Paul's Christ then is divine, but not God. Paul never referred that we say that to Jesus as Theos, God, is pre-existent but not uncreated, and the idea of Christ as uncreated, co-eternal with the Father, will only begin to take shape at the end of the first century and into the second, alongside parallel developments like the notion of the Torah as uncreated. Even our close reading of the Philippians hymn, supported by numerous studies, suggests this. When Paul says that Christ was in the form of God, it doesn't mean that Christ was God. Being like God in Paul's language doesn't equate to being God himself. In fact, Paul never referred to Jesus with the title Theos, like God, no? And this Paul's Christology is low Christology because only the next development will bring Christ to high Christology, and hence the Paul's Christology is perfectly insert into Second Temple Judaism, Messianism.
Okay, this is oh my goodness, Gabriele. Oh my goodness, this is a very hot potato. They say in America, the hot potato topic. Okay, so Giulio, you're saying that for Paul, remember this is a book about Paul the Hebrew in his original context, Second Temple Judaism context. So I have heard Gabriele mainly say there were degrees of divinity. Okay, so I'm a Christian. Okay, I don't want to talk for you guys. I'm assuming you are Christians as well. Okay, so normally for a Christian in the pew, when they hear this, like, okay, Jesus was not God, but he was divine, it might be like a bomb in the ear, because the traditional doctrine or teaching about Jesus is that he is 100% human, 100% God. So Gabriele, how would you respond to that? I mean, you're muted. Hit us with your response.
The Christian understanding, okay? The Christian understanding of Jesus as God is the result of a long process of self-understanding. I mean, who Jesus was at the beginning a mystery. I mean, something that the Christians try.
Thank you for being honest.
And remember also that the truth of the gospel is not given by each single volume of the New Testament, but is given according to Christian faith. Now I'm talking like a theologian. Is given by the whole New Testament. So in the whole New Testament, the message of the New Testament is that Jesus is Theos, that Jesus is the Logos that became flesh. So, but this is not the end, the beginning of a discussion. This is the end of a long discussion, because the Gospel of John, the author of the Gospel of John would have answered your question as he does in the first chapters when he talks about Jesus prophetizing the destruction of the temple.
Yeah.
And the author says, at the beginning we thought that we were referring to the temple of Jerusalem. But then, because of the Holy Spirit repeated the words of Jesus, and our understanding, our knowledge grew, now we came to the realization that instead he was talking about his body, he was talking about himself. So you see, this is a way to say, not that this is a new doctrine, that Jesus was talking about, but was finally the understanding of the church. And this is the function for the author of the Gospel of John, of the Holy Spirit that is repeating. So we should not be scandalized by the fact, as Christians, we should not be scandalized by the fact that the first Christians did not have yet a full understanding of the nature of Jesus. Okay? Because when Jesus died, they tried very hard to understand the mystery of Jesus, who Jesus was. And of course, they used the categories that were available to them. And the first category that were available were the category developed by Jewish apocalypticism, by the Jewish apocalyptic thought.
Yeah.
And this is the reason why, since the beginning, the first Christians believed that Jesus was more than human. Okay? More than human. Because this is what exactly the tradition of Enoch was saying, because evil is not from human, but comes from angelic forces, superhuman forces. The remedy must be superhuman. And in fact, in the Gospel, we said that no one can enter the house of the strong one if he's not stronger. So no human could defeat these evil forces. And so the Son of God should do it. Okay? The problem is that, okay, this is a good answer, but what Jewish Messiah, Enochic tradition was provided them was the idea that the Messiah was more than human. But then they continued to discuss, and this is what we find in Paul. Jesus is more than human, but then the question is, what is the relationship with God? And then this is the reason why they were discussing different degrees of divinity. Yes, Jesus is not simply a man. He has a certain grade of divinity. But is this grade of divinity, this degree of divinity, the same as the Father or not? Paul is still undecided because he makes a difference between the Father, Theos, and the Son, the Kurios. So he makes a distinction and does not attribute to Jesus the same functions as the Father. But then the discussion will continue. You take the letter to the Hebrews when they discuss, okay, Jesus is a superhuman being, but what is the relationship with the angels? And the answer is
superior,
far more the angels. So what is the point of discussing this issue if Jesus was already considered equal to God, so having the same degree of divinity as God? Instead, they are comparing Jesus with other beings, the angels, that they have a certain degree of divinity. And so the question is obvious. Yes, Jesus has a degree of divinity, but is this degree of divinity the same or is superior to the angels? And the answer is far above the angels. And then we have the Gospel of John. The Gospel of John, John would have said, by discussing and repeating this question with the help of the Holy Spirit, I came to a conclusion according to Scripture. And so he finds in Scripture the concept of the Logos that comes to dwell on earth. This is an element that you find also in the book of Sirach. So we have the discussion about the Logos that already was done in Hellenistic Judaism by Philo of Alexandria. So at this point, here is the revelation of John. But John does not present it as a new revelation, because there is no new revelation. Okay? Is presented as the final understanding of the truth. And in fact, this is the end of the New Testament, because we have to look at the New Testament as the recording of the process that led to the definition of a Christian truth. But historically, we have to recognize the different stages, the different steps that the discussion of the first Christians. And we have to remember that Paul did not write after the Gospel of John. He wrote
okay. So in terms of
long before. With Paul, we are at the very beginning. We are even before the Gospels. So we have made Paul a post Johannine theologian, while instead Paul is at the very beginning. So Paul represents a very early stage in the Christological debate.
And this is where chronology really matters. This is where chronology really factors in, because what I understand from you, Gabriele, is that, I mean, you're taking, I don't know if it's traditional, or Giulio, you can tell us a bit more about this. What do you think about this chronology? But what I understand is that you are taking John to be on the end of the first century. Am I right? I mean, and Paul is like the first, then the Gospels, and finally John. That's the chronology you're going with. Okay, so I ask along the same lines the same question to Matthew Nobenson. He was in the podcast, and I asked him, okay, do you think, that was one of the main questions actually. I asked him, so do you think Paul really he took Jesus to be the incarnate God of Israel, like the big, and he's like. Matthew knows, so he was like, I wouldn't go and say that Paul thought of Jesus as the incarnate God of Israel. Why? Because that's not the language that Paul is employing in his writings. And I was stunned, like, okay, wait a moment, what's that? And he's like, no, he's using terms like Messiah, Son of God, the anointed, Jesus Christ, but he never uses the incarnate. That's something that you'll find on John, but that's later on. Paul has nothing to do with that. And I was left like a little bit, okay, well, I need to regroup my thoughts on this. Giulio, what do you think? You think it's, do you align with what Gabriele is saying here on Jesus' divinity? Or do you have something else to
Yes,
discussion?
Yes, because his Christology have been a development in 50 or more years, and initially is rooted in the apocalyptic view, where the Messiah is a superhuman being, but not God, divine, but not God. And this is a genuine Jewish concept of the early of first century. Yes,
we cannot deny that that there is a dramatic change in language in Christianity between the first and the second century. For instance, in the second, nobody was talking of Jesus as the Logos in the first century. When instead you had asked a Christian in the second century who Jesus is, the answer would have been immediately the Logos. Okay? A first century Christian would have probably answered Jesus is the Son of Man. Okay? Which is the name of the apocalyptic Messiah, the superhuman Messiah. That is divine, but doesn't have the same degree of divinity as the Father. Okay. no one in the first century is talking of Jesus as our God. Our God.
Yeah.
You never find in Paul the phrase our God. You always you always find a sort of binitarian address, no? Our Father and our Lord. Okay? Never we find the reference of Jesus as our God, which becomes common in the second century. You read the letter of Ignatius, who imitates the style of Paul, but use the term our God, which denotes a dramatic change in the understanding of Jesus in relation to the Father, which is, by the way, if you like, the natural outcome of a discussion that started even before Paul, obviously, and then was developed by Paul, by the Gospels, and then was given a certain kind of solution by John through the concept of incarnation, which is not in any text written before, while becomes after John a sort of point of no return. I mean, if you deny incarnation, you are not a Christian. Okay, and this became immediately, and it's also true that not even John was the end, because Christians continue to discuss. Otherwise, I mean, if everything was already in Paul, the Trinity, the definition of Jesus as theos, etc. Why are they discussing so much? And why they continued this discussion continued also after John. After John, because okay, is the incarnation, but what does it mean?
Yeah.
What does it mean? And it took centuries. I mean, in the councils of the church. I mean, now we are celebrating the anniversary of the Council of Nicaea. I mean,
yeah.
And it took centuries just to understand. I mean, but of course, John marks a very important step, and it is not for me accidental that the gospel, the canon of the church includes as his own, if you want, as his own climax with the Gospel of John, that defines the Christian faith. And of course, the canon also asks the believers to read, not as we do, scholars, chronologically, the different texts, but to read all the texts in the New Testament in light of the others. And so, but this is a theological approach. The Christian is the result of a Christian faith.
Yeah, let's take it for what it is. Yeah.
And in this way, Paul, the Gospels, the letter of the Hebrews, etc., they have all been read in light of John, even though John was written at the end, because it is the final understanding of John that enlightens the other text and fulfills the meaning, the hidden meaning, if you want, something that Paul, the Gospels, the author of the Gospel, wanted to achieve but were not able to express fully because they didn't have the vocabulary for doing so. And finally, through the language of the Logos and through the language of incarnation, the Gospel of John gave the language for expressing what the first Christians could have said in the beginning, I knew it was God.
Yeah. Okay, let me just throw these are personal questions from me to you. The first one, I will direct this question to Julio. Julio, in terms of restoration of Israel, can we see it as a new creation motif by Paul being played when he is addressing, and more specifically in Romans 9 through 11? So that question is for you. Gabriele, can we go as far as to say that the Gospel of John is the only more evident gospel where we can find pre-existence? So I will go with Julio first, and then I will go with Gabriele, and then we're going to jump to the last question of this interview. Julio.
Yeah, thank you. For Paul, with the first coming of Christ, he started a new age, a new period, and but only with the second parousia, the second coming, this period is fully realized. Yeah. For this motif, for example, Paul in Galatians told of present evil age, because only with the second parousia the world will be free from the evil, and this period, this present age, for Paul is the time to build a new community, new Israel, the whole Israel, like Romans 11:26, and in this Israel live together Gentiles and Jews. The Gentiles remain Gentiles, and Jews remain Jews, but without discrimination, for use a modern term. We can think to Galatians 3:28. There aren't Greeks or Jews, women or women. And hence this time is the time to prepare this Israel, and in preparation to new creation, Paul many times tell in terms of woman in labor, or he said, I am a mother, and I would to Christ born in you, in Galatians 4:19. Also, Paul wanted prepare his communities to eschatological end, to last days, when Christ return. And this period is like like a messianic labor of new son, who is the new Israel, the old Israel, where Jews and Gentiles live together. Yeah.
They are incorporated to the family of Abraham.
Yeah,
definitely. I agree with that. So, Gabriele,
without
before you
confusion, each one maintain these differences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I remember the Acts 15. You know, they had that meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, let's just not allow to do this. To abstain from this kind of things, but they in some way they were retaining some of their identity. Gabriele, before you hit us with your answer, please tell me, those books behind you, are those from Morris Siebeck? The great ones. They are next to you. I think those very good books are those from Morris Siebeck?
No, these are copies of my Middle Judaism.
Oh, Middle Judaism, yeah. Oh,
yes, my Facebook that I keep here. Many of his books are
Gabriele is bookish.
Yeah.
Okay, Gabriele, hit us with the answer.
Very quickly about the problem of persistence. It's very complicated because there is also a discussion about the Son of Man in the tradition of Enoch. If the Son of Man is pre-existent or not, or if the Son of Man, or if only the name of the Son of Man is preordained by God since the beginning. Like in the book of the parables, it seems to be the case, because at the end, then Enoch is revealed to be the Son of Man. So
the Son of Man, yeah.
In the situation in Paul is already more complicated by the fact that, especially when it talks about we have only one God, the Father, who is the creator of everything. Yeah. And then we have only one Kurios, one Lord.
One Lord, yeah.
Through whom everything was created. Okay? This implies the language of wisdom, okay, already.
Yeah.
The language in which the Son is attributed the function of being an instrument in creation. He's not the creator, because creation belongs to the Father only, and to a certain extent is what defines God as the only God. God is not the only divine being, but is the only creator of everything else.
Yeah.
This is what makes the difference between God. So the Father is the creator, and everybody else is created. Okay, unless is manifestations, and in fact, John then will identify a manifestation of God, the Logos, with the Jesus.
Logos, yeah.
But the language of Paul reminds me already the language of wisdom, and the concept of wisdom is very complicated, because by some was considered created, and by some others were considered not created. So what? Unlike the Logos is uncreated. There are no doubts about this. But wisdom, some authors,
the second God,
was created. Some authors. So I would say that most believe that wisdom was a creation, was created, was a sort of angelic being. And by the way, this is the way that the iconography of the Holy Sophia, the Holy Wisdom, even today in the Orthodox churches, is like a female angel.
Look at that.
Because this was the original idea. I mean, Sophia is a female angel, or at least because Sophia is female, Ochma is female. Yeah. So this was the way in which was understood. Now, pre-existent does not mean coexistent with the Father. Pre-existent. I mean, even the rabbis will say that the law is pre-existent.
Yes.
But is not coexistent with God. Okay? is not because before there was God who created the Torah. The Torah is the first to be created, and so is pre-existent in relation to everything else. So the idea is that the Sophia is the first instrument created by God, through whom God made the universe. And so apparently Paul is reflecting this view in which the curious Jesus is pre-existent, not in the term of John, because in John there was never a time in which first of all the Logos is not created, and he's at the beginning with the Father.
With the Father,
the two are coexisting, while instead the idea that wisdom is created as the instrument means that there was a time in which the Father was alone until the Father created wisdom as the first instrument. And so this is the reason why apparently for Paul, Jesus, the Son, like the other son, Adam, because we have two sons of God in Paul. We have the obedient son and the disobedient son. They were created by God. And also the way in which in Philippians, I mean, he described the fact that Jesus had a certain, even though he possessed the identity, the form of God, like Adam, because this is a language of Genesis. Jesus, I mean, if you read, if you cannot understand the hymn of Philippians without reading Genesis, because in Genesis said that Adam was created, was put in the Garden of Eden, but he was not content with the equality. He was the image of God. Okay.
Yeah,
but he was not content with his equality, with the equality that he had with God, but he wanted to be God, because the serpent is telling exactly these things. Sometimes we did not remember the words of the serpent, but the serpent said to Adam, and Adam and Eve, if you eat the fruit of the garden, you will be God.
Yes.
Adam is not God, but wanted to become God. Instead, Jesus, unlike God, like Adam, was content with this kind of equality that he had with God. He didn't want to become God. He was content with the form of God that was given to him. And he lowered. There is no language of incarnation in Paul. There is the language of kenosis, to lower, to become
to boy himself,
so
to boy himself,
but from being an heavenly being, he became a human and even took the form of a slave. So
the
lowest kind of human. Okay, but then because of his obedience, he was restored.
Exalted.
He was elevated, he was exalted. And
to the highest.
Exactly. And he became even higher than he was before, because he was given the name that is higher to all our names, and all human beings and all angels will bow down to him, which did not happen at the beginning. So the process is the lowering, and the ending is a status that is higher than he had before.
Gabriele is preaching now. Why can't I get this in church? I mean, why can't I get these readings? I mean, no, I'm not kidding. I mean, he's a historian, but he is an exegete, just like Julio. So why can't we get this in church, for goodness sake? But makes sense. I mean, that's why I'm not trying to interrupt it, because that way of interpreting Paul languages and everything caught my attention. I mean, makes sense. So definitely, I need to say this in terms of, just to wrap it up with the Christology thing. Sorry about that, but I'm all into Christology, as I said it previously. But that's I have never heard about that reading that Gabriele just gave us. Julio, I don't know you if you have if you have heard about that anywhere else, but yeah, I mean, it's the way how Jesus, he was not God, okay, he was divine, yeah, sure, but he came, according to Paul, as Gabriele was saying, he came into the earth, he devoid himself about that glory that he had. I mean, in John, Gabriele, he said to the Father, please, just return the glory that I had with you from before the foundation of the world. So, I mean, that's a lot to say that, but I will leave it just right there because time is running out. Guys, I just want to go with the final question here because I think it's very important. To conclude, you advocate for an inclusive theology and not a substitutional one. So please tell us more about that. What do you mean by inclusive theology? Giulio, let's go with you first.
Yeah. Jesus, the Messiah, doesn't cancel the earlier gift of God, the natural law on the Torah. Yeah.
Okay.
Instead, he gathers them into himself, bringing them to fulfillment and offering a definitive resolution to the problem of evil. Paul's inclusive theology, for us, is deeply rooted in Judaism. As this present age draws to a close, Paul prepares, as I said before, eschatological communities, a group that represent the whole Israel that is to be saved. These communities are mixed by Jews and Gentiles. But Paul's vision of inclusion isn't just a social gesture like a contemporary concept. It's based on the conviction that Christ came for the sick, for sinners, whether Jewish or Gentiles.
Yeah.
Without ever abolishing the earlier gift God gave to humanity. Natural law and Torah, the Mosaic law, didn't abolished by Christ, but these gift of God are included into a Christ way, a Christ path to salvation. This is our final suggestion of our book.
Yes,
thank you.
And I would like to repeat something that we say just at the end, because we have the same kind of trajectory also in rabbinic Judaism, where at the center of rabbinic Judaism, especially when the Torah is presented as pre-existing, so the center, the first thing created by God, the natural law is included by the rabbis in the Torah as the law of Noah. Okay? So a rabbi, in rabbinic Judaism, one can say that salvation is through the Torah only. But it doesn't mean that only if you follow the Torah you are saved, because the Torah includes also the natural law as the law of Moses. So natural law is part of the Torah. So The Torah is a source of salvation for the Jews who follow the Mosaic Torah and for the Gentiles who follow the Noachic law. Okay? So for Paul, everything is in Christ. Christ is the source of salvation, the only source of salvation. There is a centrality of Christ and being in Christ in Paul. But Christ recapitulates in himself not only baptism, the justification by faith, that is the forgiveness of sins that a person can obtain through faith in Jesus and through baptism, but also includes the natural law and the Mosaic Torah, because Jesus, as I said before, is the one through whom everything was created, and so is the foundation of the natural law. And as Paul says, Jesus is the purpose, the scope of the law. So, saying it in modern theological terms, the person that fulfills, that lives according to the natural law or according to the Mosaic Torah, even though he's not aware of it, is living according to the law of Christ. This is the point of Paul. And a final thing, if we are not stressing these things, we are losing the center of Christian and Paul's thought. Christianity was born not as a movement that wanted to restrict the access to salvation. Okay, Christianity was born as a movement that wanted to broaden the access to salvation. Not only to the righteous according to the Mosaic Torah or according to the natural law, but also to the sinners. Justification in Christ. Christ does something that neither the natural law nor the Mosaic Torah could do, which means to justify the sinners. Why God did so? Because God recognized the difficult situation in which humans live, a situation of people under the dominion of evil.
Yeah.
And so God is merciful. God does not want. The end is coming for Paul. The end is coming tomorrow. I mean, there is no more time. And this is the same for us. We are at the end. And if people should be judged only according to the Mosaic Torah and according to the natural law, only few people will be saved. And the many, the sinners, will go to hell, to damnation. But God is not cruel. God loves humans. God is full of mercy. And in the imminence of the last judgment, he wants to give an even greater gift, which is the justification. A gift that is so great that required the death of the Messiah, the death of a son. That died not for the righteous, but died for the ungodly, for the sinners. The physician, the doctor that came to not for the righteous, but for the sinners. Because if you are not sick, you don't need the doctor. Okay, there is an illness, and illness, this disease, this epidemic. I mean, because evil is so strong that is really epidemic. Okay,
continues to be so. Yeah,
needs a remedy, and God cannot be cruel. Cannot be so cruel to say it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, because humans are not only responsible for evil, are also victims of evil. And so God, in the in the imminence of the last judgment is providing them a remedy that includes not only the righteous, but includes also the sinners. And this is the good news. Otherwise, is that no, I mean, otherwise, we think that Paul is a prophet of doom. No, I mean, for me, it's the most unfortunate interpretation or misinterpretation of Paul. Paul that was a messenger of mercy, a messenger of grace, somebody that was proclaiming the good news of the mercy of God's mercy, has been transformed in somebody that almost amused himself to send people to hell. I mean, this is not Paul, and we have to say very clear, Paul is spreading good news. And good news is that even the sinners have the chance for salvation. No one is left behind. Okay, no one.
Good pun.
This is, and I am very grateful to the late Pope Francis that puts much emphasis to God's mercy as the center of Christian message, because this is the center of Christian message, a message of mercy, a message of liberation, a message of inclusion, a message that includes everybody. No one is left behind, no one is excluded, not only the one that are saved according to the natural law of the Mosaic Torah, but even the one who failed, because God is merciful.
I just want to say this, okay? And we're going to wrap it up here. First of all, I just want to appreciate your time and thank you for being here, you both, despite of the circumstances. But I want to say this, and I want to throw it at you to see what you think. I read a book. It was written by Seth Postel. He's Jewish. I don't know if you have heard that book, Gabriele, Julio. If you know about that book, actually I can put it here on the screen so you can know what I'm talking about. And basically, he did his PhD under the supervision of the late John H. Sailhammer.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see. There you go. I got it here. So he published his dissertation, and let me put it right here so you can see it. And this is along the lines of what you guys have been talking about on terms of salvation, inclusive theology, and everything. So let me know if you can see it there on the screen. Oh yeah, there you go. So basically, he argues that Israel is Adam, Adam is Israel. Okay, and of course he develops he's drawing on the work of Sailhammer, a bit of it, and he is just breaking into throughout the book how that works. How is these the figure of Adam and Israel and their story overlaps? Okay, so my question to you both is this. Well, not a question. It's more of a statement to see what you think about that in terms of soteriology. We know that immensely difficult passage from Romans 9 through 11, who exegetes and interpreter have been dealing for hundreds and hundreds of years. But Paul says, and then when the fullness of the Gentiles, then the entire all Israel will be saved. And we recently, Jason Staples published his dissertation in 2 volumes on that topic. So the statement is this: could it be that Israel, the term Israel is a way, from a theological perspective, could be a term to cover all humanity, which in the end, ultimately, that's what Adam, Hebrew Adam, really means, humanity. So could it be that when Paul is talking about, okay, when the fullness of Gentiles comes in, then all Israel will be saved? Could it be that Paul was thinking, okay, Israel is a way to referring to all humanity? That's my statement. What do you think about that? Am I wrong? Should I leave that? Let me know what your thoughts are on that statement. And we're going to wrap it up with that. Gabriele or Giulio?
Yeah.
Giulio, let's go with Giulio first. Yeah.
In the last days, Israel is the same of all humanity. In the last days, all humanity will save, and is the same. Israel humanity is the elected people of God.
Yeah.
I agree. This is in line also with some tendency that existed in Hellenistic Judaism, where Judaism was described as a religion of humankind, not as a religion of Israel only, because Israel is the religion of nature. So whoever follows the natural law is also part of the people of God. So there are different responsibilities that are asked to different people. I mean, for instance, the solution of Philo of Alexandria, which was a great philosopher of Hellenistic Judaism, is that exactly as in the Torah, there are laws that are only for the priests and laws that are only for lay people. So in humankind, there are laws that are only for the Jews and laws that are only for Gentiles. So, but they are both part of the same people of God. So it's not something. Of course, today we have to translate. We have to translate these elements that are in the theology of Paul into new theological systems, and we have, and this is the goal of theology. I mean, we are historians, so we try to reconstruct the thought of Paul, but at the same time, the goal of modern theologians is also to translate these categories in modern categories and to develop new systems in which the basic principles of Paul are reflected. So they are in continuity with the thought of Paul. So let's hope that this will be an invitation to Jewish and Christian theologians to draw inspiration from the thought of Paul and to translate his call to inclusiveness into modern categories that could strengthen the relationship also between Jews, Christians, and all humans. I think that's a nice conclusion, Giulio?
Yes.
And let's stop one moment because again we have lost our host. I don't know if he will reappear.
Eschatological end is coming.
Yes, or he will appear in 10 minutes, but I think we have finished our interview. I mean, this is 3 hours.
Yeah.
Ok, maybe let's leave in Giulio, lasciamo aperti un momentino oppure si va via, non lo so, tanto.
Sì, io andrei anche perché sono un po' cotto da...
Anch'io. Andiamo via, tanto ci saluta.
Sì,
tanto
dai.
Finito in bellezza, con qualche foto.
Esatto.
Ciao Giulio.
Dai, ci sentiamo, grazie ancora
Ciao.
Gabriele.
Ciao.
Buona serata, buonanotte, ciao.
you.